Hi. Hopefully we can mute a lot of this out. Perfect. All right, welcome to a review of Game Week 1. I guess first of all we should probably apologise for the overexposure of light. I don't think it's a great shape to see my dial in perfect exposure, let alone when it's overexposed. So we'll have that fixed up for you soon. Just a bit of a blind in the office that appears to be causing an issue. But anyway, so what we wanted to do on this session was we wanted to run through the timings on the site. There's a lot of folks that are new to Fantasy Rugby Draft that haven't played the game before, the Aviva guys. So what we wanted to do is just kind of let you know what happens on the site and what times around it happening, and what you need to be doing at various times during the week, because a lot of this is new to folks. We also want to run through what you want to do if you haven't joined a league yet or you haven't created a league. Fear not, you can join, but we wanted to run through how you do that. How to add players on the waiver wire, what's the waiver wire, how does that work, and also how to trade players as well. We're going to also get into a few bits of strategy around Game Week 1, what you shouldn't do at this point and what you should do. There are a couple of kind of basic premises that we run by in the office. And then we're going to look at a few players as well, and then look at a bit of the scoring. And finally, we're going to answer a couple of your questions. And as I say at the start, if you do manage to catch us while we're live, then fire through the questions. Right. So the timings on the site. So the first thing is around the game week lock. We discussed that last week, and most of the folks got that sorted pretty quickly. So it's half an hour before the first game week of the round. The next bit of information is around the league table. So when that updates, and that's when your matchup goes final, that's at 11 a.m. UK time. And what that does is it commits all of your scores to your for and against in your league table, and it also ranks you all in your individual conference and your overall in your league. And then lastly, it produces the waiver wire ranking so that it tells you where you sit in the waiver wire ranking for Tuesday night, so how you actually add players. Excuse me, and I'll touch on that in a wee bit anyway. So let's have a quick look at after that. Yeah, so after the league table update, we go into a new game week, so that's 2 hours after that. So I think 1 p.m. UK time, we flick over to the new game week, and you can see who you're playing in your matchup section for the upcoming game week. Also, other bits and pieces happen in the player hub that kind of shifted on one game week, looking at your opposition for each individual players. And then 3 hours after that, so at about 3 or 4 o'clock, I think it's 4 o'clock in the UK to be fair, I think it's 4 o'clock, we release the start bench and trade buttons, so you can start manipulating your team and seeing your needs, see what you want to pick up, see where you've got any gaps, and go from there. So that's at about 4 o'clock on UK afternoon, and you get control back of your team. Tuesday night, 8 o'clock, is the waiver wire, so what we call the waiver wire. So during the weekend, you can place any requests for any players that are unowned, that are what we call free agents, in the player hub, and you can press add. And you'll see that they're all on waivers, and what that means is that on Tuesday night, for your league, the site will then go and process all of those requests. So if, say, 6 people put in for Alex Zozolski, which is a likely scenario if he's not owned in your league, then the site will figure out, based on that waiver wire ranking that we talked about, how to add that into your team and who won Alex Lazowski. So there's 2 ways that it can be done, the waiver wire ranking. The first way is around the reverse of the draft order, and it never resets. That's a little bit more of a professional version or a pro league type way to do it. That's how we do it in most of our leagues, certainly us in the office. But the other way, which is a little bit fairer and a little bit more keeping the players that are new, that may have not had a very good start, competitive, It's the reverse of the league table every time, every game week. So if you're last every game week, then you're going to get the first waiver wire pick every game week as well. But use that wisely, because there's quite a few bits and pieces in there that you just need to be careful around. You don't want to use, especially if you're going the first route, in that you need to, it's the reverse of the draft order. You need to make sure that you don't use that on someone that is a lower player. That's quite a powerful ace to have in your pack if you've got that waiver wire number 1 ranking, or even number 2 and number 3. It's fairly high up. But if you're going the other way, and check with your commissioner, because he's the guy that set it up and he'll figure it out that way. Right, so Bruce Baxter asks, what about improving rugby? Sure. We'll get on to that after we finish this live session. Improving rugby. I like it. So that's the waiver wire. Once you use your waiver wire ranking, it resets. So it'll go back to, if you had the number 1 pick and you used it, then you go back to having the 10th ranking as well. So it's not like you can always just pick up any player you want. You've got to use it wisely, because it resets and goes back down. If you want to trade players, as I say, you can do those. Buttons come back after at about 4 o'clock UK time. So look on the player hub and check out to see which players you want. Search from the player hub for the player that you're after, and there's a trade button over on the right hand side that you propose a trade. And obviously you have to propose someone from your team as part of that trade, and try not to be too derisory. You're in a fantasy rugby league for a while. You don't want to piss off your mates too much, because you don't want to piss off your mates, and you don't want to rip off your mates too much. And the reason for that is because they won't come and trade with you again. So you just want to rip them off enough that doesn't piss them off and doesn't think like they're having a bad deal. Right, some general strategies around game week 1, what to do, what not to do. So is not overreacting. So when you look at a lot of the results and a lot of the players, there is a lot of guys that didn't perform this weekend as you would have hoped, a lot of the studs. There were a lot of the guys that you expected to did do well, but there was a lot that didn't. So our kind of general rule is not to overreact with guys like, say, Manatu Alagi, who you're expecting a lot more of. He didn't let you down, 10 points was okay, but I wouldn't go cutting him and trying to find a player like Matt Scott on the waiver wire. I think it's a good idea to pick up Matt Scott, but I don't think it's a good idea to chop one of your studs. So don't overreact, don't knee-jerk, and just kind of ride it out, if you will. So 18 weeks is a long time in your regular season. So stick with them, and I certainly wouldn't be overreacting at this time of the season. Another kind of general strategy we look at is that unless you really have, and this is specific to Aviva of course, unless you have Don Armand, then pretty much every other lock is expendable or replaceable. So it's quite important to jump on those guys pretty quickly in the waiver wire, and obviously a big name not a big name, a cool name actually, but not a big name, is Will Whitty. He scored 13 odd points as a lock. And maybe it won't work out. Maybe that's a complete aberration. Maybe that's not repeatable. It's never going to see it again. But maybe it is. Maybe there's an outside chance it could be. So it's not, as I say, unless you have Don Armand, it's not a bad idea just to try and play what we call a little bit of lock roulette each week. And if you can see a guy early that's scoring points like Will Whitty, it's worth rolling the dice on him just to see if it's repeatable. As I say, it may not actually pan out, but maybe it does. Okay, so I guess most of you are looking at Alex Lazowski and wondering, I guess, what to do with him. Is that repeatable? If he's not owned in your league, then absolutely he should be owned. So go and put a waiver request in for him as the first port of call. If he is owned in your team, in your league, then the question is Owen Farrell on that same team? Alex Lazowski is never going to have a higher value than he had today, and he is right now. So if you've got Alex and the Owen Farrell doesn't, and he's not, and you don't have Owen Farrell on your team, then look who that Owen Farrell owner is, and then start offering him to trade bait, because that's a big carrot to have to lock up that Saracens fly half spot. And as I say, now we can almost, I don't think we can safely assume that there's no risk with Lazowski, but that's a pretty impressive performance, and it shows what he can do in that machine of a pack. So he'll be pretty good, and it's clear that he's the goal kicker, and it's clear that he's the backup to Farrell, which was a little bit of the question mark going into the draft. So not a bad shout there to stick with that. So see if you can find the Owen Farrell owner and get with him. If you are the Owen Farrell owner, congratulations, you've done drafting 101 well. Right. Another player that is fairly lowly owned, I think he's only owned in, what was it? He's only owned 25% of leagues, is Sanotti. All that back three actually performed pretty well, Hammersley and Gonover, but the other two are fairly highly owned. So I would be targeting Sanotti on the waiver wire this week. That plastic pitch up there. Now, it could be, obviously it's a little bit of a byproduct of sale, and it's difficult to say exactly how they are going to go, but it certainly wasn't a very impressive performance, and maybe that's why Sanotti, Gonover and Hammersley played quite well or got some points. But either way, he's someone that should be owned. The guys in the preseason, the podcasts talked about him quite frequently as well as a player that you want to target, and a really, really good outing first up from him. Saracens front row, all owned in every league, but it just shows you how powerful that was. We had a few front rows that were strong in Super Rugby, the Lions and the Hurricanes, and it looks like the Saracens could well be one of those as well. Again, it's Worcester, so let's pump the brakes a little bit, but yeah, it's certainly good news to start with. We like a theory at Fantasy Rugby Draft Towers. So last season in Super Rugby, it was any front row playing against the Sunwolves. You usually plug and played if you could get that player and he was unowned in your league. We're kind of wondering if there might be something in the anyone playing Sale theory. So we're going to put that out there for the first game week. Newcastle scored quite well, and I don't think they are a powerhouse of a front row, but they did score well against Sale. So let's just check, let's see. Let's test that theory this time next week. But yeah, have a look who's playing Sale each week and see if that's an option. Certainly if they're away from home. So yeah, a few folks were asking about Opta and about the live scoring, as were we. So as it turns out, what Opta do is, if the game is not televised live in the UK, then they'll take a feed. If the game's not televised live on Friday or Saturday, they'll take a feed and they'll review it, and it'll be posted, the stats will be posted the following day, somewhere in the early afternoon, late morning. If it's a Sunday game, and there's two games on and one of them isn't televised, as is what's happening this weekend, they've committed to having the stats updated by that night, so Sunday night UK time, which is great. Yeah, so an interesting little wrinkle in there, and I know a lot of folks were wondering what was happening in the Northampton Bath game and also the Newcastle Sale. They just didn't have the stats coming through, so that's why. If you haven't already seen our retweet on Twitter, and we'll put it in the show notes, in the Facebook Live notes once we've finished this up. So if you're watching this video afterwards, you can have a look at this article as well. Tom Hiscott has written a good article around players to target this game week on the waiver wire. Interestingly enough, we parked our car in the same garage of one of the players, so go check that out. As I say, we'll put the link in here, or follow him at Hiscott, 2 T's. And he'll be putting that out most Mondays, so really good read. Adding a league or creating a league now, so you can do that. You can do that right up to the 18th game week. So if you missed out on 16 game weeks, it just means that if you joined sometime in March, that you'd only have the last 2 game weeks as your regular season, and then you go into your playoffs. But it's not like any other fantasy where if you miss out on the first week, or if you have a bad week in a salary cap game, then it's pretty hard to overcome sometimes, especially if you've got some sharps in your league. But for fantasy rugby, you can join at any one point in time, and all it is doing is it's shortening that regular season for you. So, we see folks, joining right up to the last game week, and that's really cool. They've decided to do a 1 week shootout. It's pretty crazy, but and we don't recommend that. We recommend you can get on as quickly as possible to have. So if you jumped on now, for instance, you get 17 game weeks. Ahol Jones, hashtag where's Mossman? Yeah, that's a good question. He's under the hood at the moment, so he's deep in the FRD bunker, trying to knock out a bit of stuff for you guys, actually. He's got some pretty cool stuff in the pipeline, so that's where he is. Ricketts, your wildcard pick for BR. You might have to explain that, sorry, Mr. Ricketts. I suspect he might be saying front row, is that right? Yeah, maybe a front row. In which case, Newcastle, as we talked about, any team that was, maybe they're good, maybe they're not, maybe they're just a byproduct of playing Sale, but we're going to run with the theory for 1 week that whoever's playing Sale might actually have some value as a front row, so we'll go with that. I do like the hashtag where's Mossman though, that sounds like a good one. Right, so who else have we got here? So, Owl Jones, again, did ask a question on Twitter. He said, probably too early to call, but what differences have you seen in midfielders for Super Rugby compared to Aviva Premiership? And that is a great question. So, it is early, and we do have... Okay, got you, Kieran. Sorry about that, mate. And we do have 1 week of stats to run with. So if you looked at, say, the top 5 or even the top 10 midfielders in Aviva, I'm not sure many of those guys you would have predicted before the start of this game week that they'd do quite well, but they are certainly an option as well. I just wonder... It's just really early to kind of knee-jerk around midfielders. I mean, we talked about Tuolagi, but it just seemed in Super Rugby you can bank on a lot of those stud midfielders a lot easy. Van Rensburg, even Dalinde, Ngatai, those types of Fikatoa. These guys are a little bit more bankable. Whereas if you looked at the midfielders right now, in the scoring after game week 1, I think Matt Scott might be leading it, and he's hardly owned it with anyone. So there's a good example. I guess in short, Owl, I don't really know. It's really, really difficult to say. I will say that the points that they've scored is a little bit more than I thought they would. I thought they wouldn't be scoring. I thought they'd score a little bit more than. A little bit less than that. But I'd say that overall on midfielder scoring has surprised me, certainly from game week 1. Now maybe it's because it's a little bit of summer, that the tracks are still quite dry and they're throwing it around, and come December, kind of January time, those averages will come down. But for now, let's bask in the glory of the midfield resurgence. Back row, back to Kieran Ricketts, who asked that question. It's a good one. Brendan O'Connor is actually a pretty decent one. Now, I know tries aren't repeatable, and it's difficult to kind of bank on tries as a statistic to prove a player's worth. But Brendan O'Connor was pretty good, and that Leicester team looks like it's got a little bit of fun in it after the heroics on Friday night, after being down 1,000 points. And he certainly had a bit of value in Super Rugby as well. He's the type of player that seemed to pick up quite a few points doing the fantasy type stuff. So yeah, there's a good player for you. Matt Kaveshik is playing well. Sam Jones, I think, is another one that I was thinking of. And yeah, so there are a handful there, but I'd say Brendan's a good shout there. So we've talked about, okay, so if you're coming in late, you can still create a league and you can join a league. You just can't draft on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, so make sure you do it outside that window. And what happens when you actually, after you've drafted, what it does is it gives all of the other results, all of the other matchups in the previous weeks that you've missed, just ties. So it effectively just takes them out, and nothing, doesn't affect you. And as I say, if you join now, you'd have a 17-week regular season. to playoffs. Again, folks that are joining and playing draft for the first time, it's very much you're never out of it. So as alluded to earlier in the salary cap, sometimes you can get behind and it's really difficult to make up the gap or make up the distance. Whereas in fantasy rugby draft, you only need to get that last wild card spot. So the top two, so the top of each conference and the next two best records are who makes the playoffs in your league. And we've seen managers and teams that have come through with losing records. So 8 and 10, for instance, makes it into your playoffs, and more often than not, they're on a bit of a roll in as well, and they take the title home. So don't be discouraged if you've taken a loss this week, next week, or even the week after that. You can sometimes, as I say, we've seen people with 8 losses make the playoffs. So you're always in it, and that's the beauty of this. Right, what was the last things I wanted to chat about? So yeah, Metush asks, if I have 2 waiver claims to replace one player, what happens if both claims are successful? So it's a good question. So if you've got a number of requests that you've added into your pending waivers section, go into your lineup and have a look at your pending waivers, and you can see all of the players that you've added that you want to be processed in the waiver wire, and you can order them. And that's where I was saying before, it's quite important to make sure that you get the rankings right, so that you you test the temperature gauge of your league. You know which of the players, like Alex Lazowski is going to be in massive demand if he's unowned in yours, so he should be your number 1 waiver wire pick. And then you rank it further down. But what I personally do, is I might put the same cut player for quite a few of my first waiver ads. And that way, if I don't get him for the first one, if I don't get Alex Lazowski for this player, then I've still got this player on my team, and it goes to the next waiver wire request. So that way you're not burning players that you didn't want to burn, and it's just a matter of making sure you get that priority right in the pending waivers section. But you can also cancel one in there as well. So if you've made a claim during the weekend and you don't feel as though that's in your best interests, or you've changed your mind, you can go and press cancel as well. So you can reorder and cancel in there at the same time. But going back to your question, Met, is exactly that. You can. If you've got 2 requests in, it processes the higher claim that you actually get, and then it just cancels the other one because that player is no longer on your team. Mike Delaney, good draft? Yeah, I think so. I think he's going to be solid. Now again, we don't really know if that's a sale. Sorry, that was Rugby Inside Line, just to let you know. We don't really know if it was a byproduct of playing Sale and they're at home a first game up, and a plastic pitch up there in Newcastle, but I think he'll be decent. He's a player that wasn't drafted until quite late, so it's fair to say you've probably done okay in outside backs and midfielders, or even loose forwards at some other positions. So I think he's probably someone that is going to be steady, and with, as we pointed out at the top, with that back 3 as well, there's probably going to be points in there, and chances are that you can't play Sale every week. There might be a few more points once that defence kind of is stressed by someone like Saracens or Leicester. Rugby Inside Line, Laidlaw, Stenson Slade, Delaney, Melander. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, so Harry Melander's an interesting one. We actually posted at the start of the weekend, after the teams were named, that he could well be the steal of the draft, all of a sudden being named at 10 and kicking goals for Northampton, who were predicted to do pretty well. I still think they will do pretty well, but not a great outing for them first up, and poor old Harry Melander didn't have a great day with the boot. So let's see how that kind of pans out a little bit, but that's not looking as bright as it did certainly at the start of the weekend. Yeah, and I think Rugby Inside Line, I think you might be right, Myler will be the 10 next week. We talked about players we want to look at. There's Will Whitty, one other player in Sanotti is probably In the expert leagues or the folks that have got a really good active league, chances are he's probably going to be owned, but that's a player to look at as well. But Joe Marchant's another one who's only 13% owned. There's a good example of someone who's a midfielder who, for those in the know, clearly they've owned him in their league and they've started him, but a lot of folks out there are just trying to understand how it works and how the point scoring works. He still is available in 80% of leagues. Right, that's probably all about for now, I think. I think the best bit of advice I would say is just not to overreact in week one. Try and make some additions to your team for Tuesday night's waiver wire and see if you can make some subtle changes to your team to improve it, but don't overreact, and I don't want to see any big names that are dropped onto the waiver wire. Another one to point out is Faletau. So he had a bit of an injury. Again, don't cut him just yet. Let's wait for some proper diagnosis from the doctors and let's see how long he's out for. But again, it's a long season. You can ride out a few of your studs, either injury, suspensions or form. So stick with it. They're studs for a reason. All right. Thanks for joining. Take it easy.